So you're making some progress. I regress.
Well, we hope that they can talk. It's gonna be a huge part of that. Yeah, fine.
Hey, Tony. Do you remember who it was that said they'd like to read this?
Somebody mentioned Carol Brooks, but I'm not sure.
But somebody else, and we were talking.
Oh, Barbara Brown.
Oh,
I think he found out in like 2 months.
apparently he's got a lot of sight.
Yeah. So he won't be doing it for the week.
Friday and Saturday are already good days that he'll be popular. So that's why. So if you're going to listen to me,
Evelyn.
yeah. Yeah, since we can't do anything. But we'll go there a couple days ago, they asked us, I said, well, we can get to every time we talk that we're going to an issue, and it's going to go to the response. So we need to at least give it a couple of days.
Hey, man. Okay.
Where are you going? Playing hooky?
Yeah.
That's been the issue. Can't put the shower here, the windows, can't do this,
How are you? You haven't heard of book? Yeah. You alright? Okay, good. You got nothing you on the line over here. Yeah, you on the head. Yeah? Oh, there you go.
You're a Lone Ranger today?
Okay.
Good morning. I'm good, how are you? Well, he said she was
We're trying to dry out too fast. Doctor won't tell us.
Yeah, well, probably not.
Probably not. Gotta go in.
But we love them. Hey, you alright?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's alright. Yeah. That's for our new stuff coming up.
Rosie, you got your hair trimmed.
Thank you.
There you go.
We did put it up.
That's alright. That's alright.
I'll wait for it to grow out.
One of those, one of these.
He said, sure.
Alright. Okay. Look for our next thing. Oh, I don't know.
Oh, no, never mind. This is
I don't know about that one. I forgot about that.
And she's doing pretty good. She's
How you feel, like a new lady?
Huh?
You feel like a new lady?
New lady?
Yeah, right after you got such good rest. Been good rest last night.
Oh, yeah.
Quality today.
Sort of. Let me just say sort of.
Is that right, Bob? That's right, you're always right. Absolutely. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. How's Bob?
You're here.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, we're glad.
Good to go.
Good to go. All right. That makes one of us. Uh-oh. All right. Well, a very good morning to everybody. How's everybody this morning? Good? So? You're here? You're awake-ish? All right. Anybody need a copy of this morning's material on Revelation? Anybody need one, borrow one, not have one? Your dog ate it? No, we're good? I think we're good. All right. So we got a few lessons left anyway, including today. And so we'll be nearing the completion of our study of Revelation before you know it. And already have the material ordered and hopefully coming for our next study after we finish the book of Revelation, and that is going to be a study through what we call Christian evidences. And so it's going to cover the spectrum of Christian evidences and evidences of God and of the Bible, and talk about prophecy, and of course talk about Christ, and talk about different things. And so that's going to be where we're going to go next. And so once those books come in, I'll make sure to get those passed out, and you can have those ahead of time and be able to prepare for when that class starts. Also, I've got books for the men's study. Any of the men not have a book for our men's study coming up? Wayne, did you get one? Anybody else need one? Our men's study will be starting not tomorrow, but next Monday. So a week from tomorrow, we're going to pick up our men's study again with a new study as we start to look at the book of Nehemiah. So we'll make sure all the men who want to participate in that have a book, and we'll be good to go. All right, and also remember that this Wednesday we are starting the next quarter, the next new quarter of material. We'll start this Wednesday, and those copies are in the foyer. So if anybody still needs a copy of Wednesday night's material, the new material, make sure you get one of those there in the foyer. And we'll be starting lesson 1 on Wednesday. So make sure you grab one of those if you don't already have one. All right. Well, I think that takes care of those things. So we probably go ahead and get started. All right, well, let's begin with a word of prayer. We're going to ask Wayne if he would to lead us in that prayer as we get started this morning, and I'll get into our lesson. Wayne?
Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful to you for this morning to be able to be here and study your word and worship you. We pray, Father, we'll always love you and love your word and love one another as we ought to. Pray that you'll be with us through this study this morning and all the classes that are going on this morning, and all the people that are worshiping and assembling today. We pray that you'll be with them, and pray, Father, that we'll always have a desire to serve you and to understand what you would have us to do, and constantly examine ourselves and make sure that we are serving you as you would have us to. Pray that you'll be with those who are not able to be with us. Forgive us for our sins in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, this morning we are on lesson 10 in the workbook. There on page 61 is where we're going to be. Lesson 10, page 61. And this morning we're going to be covering Revelation chapters 17 and 18. It's going to be our focus this morning. And again, in Revelation, the focus as we cover chapter 17 and 18, much as we've seen through the majority of Revelation, especially in these last handful of chapters, the focus is on what in chapters 17 and 18 and in previous chapters. All right. So the destruction of Jerusalem, the punishment, the judgment that's coming upon them, for what? Why? All right, for their sin. As we look through this, and as we even talk today, this woman that is talked about, this harlot, the one who has, committed sin, much sin, in this great city as well, referred to as Babylon, is none other than, at least in our understanding of our outlook of this study of Revelation, what? Whom? Jerusalem. All right? And so then we're also going to talk about the beast. The beast seems to be that of Rome, and ultimately talking about how Rome was going to be used, really, as the author talked about in material, Jews, Israel, Jerusalem, they've used Rome to carry out, their wishes and desires and sins. And, ultimately, they used Rome and managed to do what? What was the biggest thing they did? Well, yeah, but the Jews, they had Jesus crucified. They used Rome to fulfill that purpose. And so, but ultimately, who is God going to use to bring judgment upon Jerusalem? Rome. The very ones they've been in bed with, so to speak, the very ones they've been using, the very ones whose shoulders they've been riding on, is going to, in fact, turn on them, as Rome would be used by God to bring judgment and punishment upon Jerusalem, upon the Jews, and ultimately destroy again everything they've known. And God's, if you will, final act to bring punishment upon them, and for them to know that the old covenant has what's happened to it. Yeah, it's been fulfilled, it's gone, it's done away with. It is no more. Tony.
What I was kind of thinking about
Yeah.
was mind-boggling, how the Jews got Rome to do their will.
Sure.
And they were one of the few that were able to practice their religion
Sure.
in the Roman Empire. But it may have been God's will when it first started out. I don't know, but because the Roman leaders did not allow the Jews, the priests and stuff became so against God. I mean, they were
Sure.
not doing His will. I don't know. It's just
Yeah. One thing, if I remember right, about Rome was they would let people practice their own religion as long as you didn't try to convert Rome. As long as you didn't try to convert a Roman citizen to follow your religious beliefs or whatever, then they let you do what you want to do as far as that is concerned. But yeah, I mean, the Jews had a lot of freedoms, if you will, and a lot of that was, politically based. But ultimately, Rome would be used to say, okay, enough's enough, and bring a lot of destruction and punishment upon them, for sure. So really, that's the scope of what we're seeing. That is the ultimate message of what's being played out. As God finally bringing judgment upon Jerusalem and upon those who have killed so many of the Lord's prophets, of His saints, of His people, of Christians. And so God is finally bringing that blood upon themselves. I mean, they're so, wicked and sinful. Remember even, when they did have Jesus crucified and they told Pilate, and they said, let his blood be on our heads. Well, certainly it was. Pilate didn't want to. But the people certainly did. And so that's what we're going to see played out here in all of this imagery, and this great fall of Babylon, this great city. Jerusalem, was a great city, economically even, had a lot of good things going for it. But also what is described in chapter 17 and 18 is how sinful it had become. The city, that used to be, God's, special city, if you will, chosen city, where the temple of God was, has just become so sinful, so corrupt, which again is why God is finally bringing judgment upon them. So we're going to start this morning in Revelation chapter 17, and we're going to find out about this scarlet woman, her beast, and this fall of Babylon, which we've already talked about some, or started to. We just back in chapters 14, 15, and 16, seeing the judgment come that's described. It was described in this pouring out of these 7 bowls. Well, now in chapter 17, beginning in verse 1, then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, with John, saying to me, come and I will show you the judgment of whom? All right. Referred to as the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And again, that seems to be speaking of Jerusalem. Again, how God often talked about Israel, his people. God often looked at it or used the marriage relationship as a way of describing, the sins of his people. And so here he's talking about in the wicked sense, or the wickedness of this city, the wickedness of these people, referring to them as the great harlot, great sin. The earth has committed, great fornication with her. And certainly Jerusalem, certainly Israel, they had a problem with that, of corrupting themselves with the world around them, of having relations with the world around them. And again, everybody getting caught up in their sin together. John, over here.
This reminds me of the trial of Christ when he said, so we end up eating with Caesar.
Yeah. Right, sure. They were sinning against God. They were betraying God, and they didn't want God's king. They didn't want the chosen king. They didn't want the true Messiah. They were very corrupt, very sinful, allowed themselves to become very worldly, tied up with the world. And so this is how they are described here in chapter 17. So John is carried away in verse 3 in the Spirit into the wilderness. And what does he see in the wilderness? All right, so there is a woman. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of what? Yeah, filthiness, abominations, her fornication. So we get this picture. Again, they've already been described as great harlot. Now the imagery John is being shown as goes out in the wilderness, and there's this woman sitting on this scarlet beast of some kind that has, 7 heads and 10 horns. It's full of blasphemous names. But there's this woman sitting on it, riding on it, using it. The woman is described in such a way. I mean, she's arrayed in luxury and so many riches, and but in the cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And then, if that wasn't enough, what is on her forehead? A name was written. All right, so verse 5, a mystery is the first thing. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Not good. Not a good description, not a good way to be named. And then also of this woman, he says, I saw the woman was drunk with what? The blood of the saints, which means what? Yeah, well, they were the ones who killed the saints of God. They were drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement, the New King James says. She's so full of sin. She's drunk on the blood of the saints, the martyrs of Jesus, those who have persecuted God's people, those who have persecuted the church, those who have killed his saints, killed Christians. And again, we know that Jerusalem, that the Jews at first were the ones who had a big hand in it. They were the ones who were persecuting the Lord's church, his people. They were the ones who through the ages killed prophets, killed his people, and betrayed God in rejecting God, not wanting to listen to God, but instead doing their own thing. Wayne?
And even things that were happening in other places originated from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
The persecution in other cities where Paul went, were
Sure.
by the Jews, the acts that were carried out in Antioch when they were trying to, cause them to want to circumcise and all the other things that they wanted to bring down on Christians. Some of it was murder and torture. Some of it was just outright prejudice and trying to get them to drift away or turn away from their first love.
Absolutely. Doing anything, everything they can to turn them away, destroy the church. Bring them back to at least their interpretation of Judaism and what they thought.
It's kind of like when you think of Rome. Well, yeah, Rome was a city in Italy, but the Roman Empire covered a huge area.
Right.
Well, Jerusalem had that kind of power too.
Sure.
In a way, even though they were under Roman thumb, they still exerted a lot of power against Christians.
Oh, absolutely. And they were the first ones to really do that. And then, of course, we know, yes, eventually, Rome would jump on that bandwagon and start persecuting Christians. But the first ones to do so were the Jews themselves.
But they even used the Romans. They
say,
this movement is trying to go against Caesar, and so they used Rome. The Jews did. Right.
And that seems to speak to this imagery we're seeing of, this woman, sitting on this beast. And if we think of that, if we're thinking of it, at least if it's the right way, that the woman being Jerusalem, riding on the beast, which is Rome, she's using Rome. She's using the beast to fulfill her wickedness. But ultimately, what we're going to see here before too long is that beast is going to turn on her. And it's going to backfire on her for sure. Bob, did you have something?
Well, naturally.
Okay.
I'm not disagreeing on anything at all you're saying.
Sure.
I'm just saying I'm not convinced we're actually talking about Jerusalem or Rome. To me, like in chapter 17, the first verse, it says, the great harlot who sits on many waters.
Sure.
Jerusalem's not sitting on many waters. It's a desert, more or less a desert, isn't it?
Well,
the Dead Sea or
a lot of it.
right near, but it would be,
Sure.
sound more like Babylon, you know, with all those rivers up there. I'm just saying, you know,
Sure.
I'm not completely convinced of
Sure.
the author's interpretation, but.
Well, but it's not.
I'm hoping that.
Yeah,
Okay?
sure. And I think when we talk about Jerusalem, it's obviously it's not just. I mean, yeah, ultimately Jerusalem itself was going to be destroyed, but Jerusalem is symbolic of the whole area of God's people, of Palestine, of
Another
Israel.
thing I've always
For sure.
been uncomfortable with is so many people hate the Jewish. The Jews.
Sure.
You know? I mean, look at, Germany,
yeah.
in the 40s
Sure.
or whatever, and so many other countries went along with that policy. You know?
Right.
But I've never hated the Jewish people.
Sure.
Jesus was from the Jewish lineage, and all the apostles.
Sure. Right.
I'm just a little reluctant to be too down on the Jews. Maybe I'm just not understanding.
No, sure. Well, it's not. I mean, it's acknowledgement we've all we love all men. All men have sinned. We've all sinned.
I know the Jewish leaders were,
Yeah.
were jealous and,
Sure. And not all Jews were that way.
I mean,
So.
but the world in general
Yeah.
has a bad, attitude about Jews. I mean, I know there were business people, smart, and the financial dealings, but I've never felt, I've never looked down on Jews. Ever,
Well, we shouldn't really look down on anybody, for sure.
Paul, in Romans 9, said he would gladly be first for their sake.
Yeah.
He loved his Jewish brethren.
Sure.
But he wanted them to turn still.
Right.
Later in life.
We want all men to be saved. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not disagreeing with anything.
No, sure.
I just
Right.
kind of a,
Sure.
I'm not convinced of some of these
Sure.
definitions.
Yeah.
I guess that's
Right.
understood because so many people,
Right.
do have different.
Sure. That's why we're trying to go through it as best we can and see what comes out on the other side, how we come out. So.
And
Wayne?
the thing about the many waters is not necessarily where the city itself was located.
Right.
Babylon was of many waters. Well, it sat on the Tigris and Euphrates, basically, but its influence was all over the place. And
Sure.
so the Jerusalem influence was all over the place too.
Right.
Like when the Bible talks about spreading over many waters, it's like spreading it everywhere. It's not
Right.
just about water itself, it's about their influence all over
Right.
the place.
And in a way, it's symbolic itself. It's figurative itself of, again, expressing their influence. Could very well be. John, back there.
It always strikes me as the parallel to Daniel 7 when it starts talking about things like this, where the description is something of horns and heads.
Yeah.
That has always been the description of huge powers. And like it or not, Jerusalem is not a huge power.
Yeah.
What is a huge power? Rome.
Yeah.
So when it starts talking about horns and kings and multiple kings and the trumpets and all of the things that are going to come here,
Right.
I believe that definitely points towards Rome and its influence.
Yeah.
But then you have to think about what is riding on top of Rome.
Right.
That might be the hardest, right?
Yeah.
Because it says very clearly
Right.
about who's riding on. Now, does
Right.
that have to be the Jews? Well, sort of.
Yeah.
But I believe it's a little bigger than that. Just like always in prophetic language, what is it talking about? It's talking about the sinful nation. It's talking about the people that are constantly abusing Christians, that are constantly behaving in ways that are not the way God wants them to do.
Right.
And so I've often thought that really what this is talking about is not just the destruction of Jerusalem, but the destruction of the entire world that they know currently.
Well, sure.
And that is exactly what happens eventually, right?
Sure. Right.
So not only does Jerusalem get destroyed, and all of the
Right.
things that they knew get destroyed, but then eventually Rome gets destroyed.
Yeah.
All of the
Right.
things that were against God get destroyed. And that's
Right.
the similar thing that you see that happened to the other nations that came
Sure.
and took Jerusalem into captivity, other nations that were there for a time and then were not. And
Right.
again, the parallels are almost uncanny. Those are, of course, Daniel 7. Daniel 7, a lot of times we don't read because we don't understand it, so we'll just skip that. And the Bible says,
Yeah.
6, 7, go to 8.
Sure.
But when you actually go back in the Old Testament and start reading some of the prophecy about big things that happen in the world, they
Right.
are almost always described similarly to this. So this
Sure.
is definitely talking about something something big that's going to
Right.
happen in the world.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's what's going to happen, yes, to Jerusalem, but also to Rome, to everybody. Ultimate judgment on all of them. So yeah, and that is the ultimate message of Revelation, is the judgment, coming upon them all for sin, whether Jerusalem, Rome, both of them together. And anyone after that, ultimately, is the lesson to be learned of God's judgments, for sure. All right, verse 7 then. The angel then said in response to John's marveling with great amazement at this harlot and this sinful woman and riding on this beast, the angel said, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition or destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written where? Not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is and yet, or was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue for a short time. And so here we're talking about, these 7 mountains. We're also talking about 7 kings. 5 that are gone, 1 that is current, and 1 that is still to come, but will only last for a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition or destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they received authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with whom? The Lamb. And the Lamb will do what? Overcome. So who wins? The Lamb, Jesus, God. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. And then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues, which also goes back, so we're talking about explaining the waters. It was symbolic, it was figurative, of all peoples, or many nations, many tongues, multitudes. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, and make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Which again seems to be, Rome possibly, their destruction, turning on Jerusalem, and coming to do that. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill what? His purpose, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are what? Fulfilled. So who's in control? God. Why did these things happen? Well, yeah, but more than that. Yeah, more than that. Keep going. You're working your way up. Because God said so. Because this was God's doing. God was bringing this upon them. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And then chapter 8. So here, again, chapter 17, we see the sinful woman, the harlot, and all of her fornication and sin with the world around her. We see the great beast. We see the beast being used. But then we see things change by the end of chapter 17, or at least of ultimately the beast then coming to hate the harlot, hate the woman, and then bring death and destruction upon her. which again, if it fits, is ultimately what Rome is going to do to Jerusalem. Chapter 18 then. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, what? All right, Babylon the Great has fallen. So again, a prophecy, an image, a vision, a declaration that this great city of Babylon, which we know is not literally Babylon, Babylon didn't exist at this time. Again, we've seen that it could refer to Jerusalem and Jerusalem's great fall. And yes, we know ultimately Rome would fall as well. But Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of what? Demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Great description, right? Wrong.
I think it's very buzzard.
But yeah, sure. Man, it is not a good place. For all the nations had drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest what? Yeah, lest you share in her sins, and then share in what? Yeah, plagues, her destruction. Lest you receive her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. How's that going to work out? Not so good. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. So this is a depiction, a description, imagery that the judgment is going to be swift, it is going to be hard, it is going to be severe, and it is going to get very bad for them. And this is the judgment of God coming upon them. Their sins, God knows, and God is judging her, bringing judgment upon her, and is going to punish her. And then the rest of chapter 18 describes what? What does the rest of chapter 18 describe? Yeah, the mourning. The world around her, the world seeing her destruction, and ultimately seeing their own personal loss of means and luxury and so on and so forth. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, so on and so forth. All these luxurious things and materials, crops and so on and so forth, chariots, even bodies and souls of men. Verse 14, the fruit that your soul longed for has now gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to what? Nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles, the prophets, for God has done what? Yeah. So we see this great destruction. And then God tells his people, Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, because God has now avenged you on her. Exactly what God promised he was going to do, and exactly what they were looking forward to, is when God would finally get retribution, when God would finally bring vengeance upon them for those whom they had killed. And then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying what? All right. So with violence, the great city Babylon will be thrown down and will not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore. The sound of a millstone will not be heard in you anymore. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore. The voice of a bridegroom and bride will not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. So again, there seems to be this great destruction and punishment, upon Jerusalem. And I think another clue that does point to Jerusalem is the talk of prophets and the killing of prophets and saints and so on and so forth, because the prophets of God, mainly, at least in the story or the scripture is, the prophets were sent to whom? To Jews, to Israel. The ones who were guilty of persecuting prophets and killing prophets were whom? Jews. So that really, the description of, the blood of the prophets and saints and so forth would not really fit with Rome as much, at least when you throw the prophets in there. So it could be also another clue as to who this great city, Babylon, is referring to as well. Destruction coming upon her. All right, so that is chapter 17 and 18. Questions or thoughts so far? Wayne?
When you look back at the actual fall of the original Babylon, you can imagine that people felt the same way.
Oh, yeah.
The center of the then known world.
Right.
And Babylon pretty much fell in one day, like Jerusalem does here.
Sure.
In relatively short period of
Short time, yeah.
Almost without a whimper.
Yeah.
If you look back at the fall of Babylon, it was just like, here they are, and poof, next thing you know, it's under the rule of the Medes and Persians.
Sure.
It's just amazing how quickly it fell, and people were just amazed at how great the fall was, and how it could go from such a glorious place to such a desolate place.
Sure.
Babylon itself, the city, was never built.
And what did the Jews, what did Israel think of even of Jerusalem?
It was it.
Yeah, it would never fall, never fail. Nothing would ever happen to it. But God bringing in this destruction proved otherwise.
And there were Jews all over the place, all the places that Paul traveled.
Sure.
Jews, Jews.
Right.
Can you imagine how they felt, even though they were not there?
Oh, yeah.
When their city, their temple, and all that they held dear was gone.
Right. Would be very shocking, very hard, unimaginable. They didn't want to see it coming. Not that they couldn't see it coming, because they were warned plenty enough. Jesus warned them. But certainly in their own minds, they could never see such a thing happening. But indeed, it did. Because that was God's punishment coming upon them. Other thoughts or questions? John, over here.
I'm not personally going to do whether it's
Sure.
But one thing that mentioned in the end is that all the prophets and saints who were killed were still in the authority around the world when they were killed. I mean, many times.
Sure.
Like another
Could be. Right.
They were still persecuted under authority of nations under Rome.
Sure. It could be too. Yeah. Right. So yeah, very well could be. And ultimately, whatever the case may be, the message, the overall message is as plain as day. And that is God is bringing judgment upon those who have sinned. And ultimately, God's people are going to be able to rejoice in the victory that we have, over sin, over the world. And that God will deal with the evil in this world. Even for ourselves today, in the wickedness we see around us in the world today, it may go on. Yeah, it's going on for quite some time. Don't know how much longer it'll go on. But one day, what's going to happen? God's going to deal with it. God's going to bring His vengeance upon them, and God is going to judge. What's that? Yeah. Absolutely. Sure. But those who are faithful, if we're faithful to the Lord, faithful to Jesus, then we are going to have victory. We are going to have salvation. We have hope. We have peace. We have joy. We have something to look forward to. And that is the hope that we get comfort and strength from, for sure. John, back here.
I was just going to throw out that my discussion of Daniel was more of the beast.
Sure.
And that the woman's influence seems to be maybe that beast maybe being grown, or that
Sure.
That the influence of the Jewish kingdom was all over the area.
Oh yeah.
And that influence doesn't just go away, but that seems to point, if this were the way it goes, it seems to
right.
point to that influence becoming very sour.
Yeah.
And then the beast destroying the woman.
Right.
And then, of course, the question is, what happens to the beast?
Yeah.
Done.
Right. Which we know ultimately, which we're not there yet, God's going to win. The beast is going to be defeated. So, yeah. Bob.
One sentence.
Yeah.
I think this book of Revelation has probably been debated going on 2,000 years.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, they probably had a better understanding of it in their day than we do. So.
I'm saying, but I'm
right.
saying it's a lifetime.
Sure.
Whatever.
Right.
Debate.
Sure. And ultimately, again, the message, the overall message is plain, is simple, and that is Jesus wins, God wins, and I want to be on His side. That's all I need to know. All right, any other thoughts, questions? All right, well, next week, Lord willing, come ready with lesson 11. Today was lesson 10. So next week, come ready with lesson 11. Got a couple more lessons. We covered the last 4 chapters of Revelation. And once the new material comes in, we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of that. All right, thank you. Did you have fun in class? Yeah. Well, good deal. Good deal. Miss Tammy, say hi.
Where's your shoes on?
Where's your shoes?
That's a beautiful dress. You got it on.
Ah, thank you. Went to the nursery. Mm-hmm. Who? Mm-hmm.